bless us all. What's that? All right. All right, we'll get the meeting going. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:05, and I'll ask Dave to call the roll.
Lucas Murray.
Here.
Kate Mass,
Massananti, you did it. Oh, they did. Here.
Raquel is absent. Mark is absent and understand will be late, possibly.
He's going to try to get here. He's giving a presentation at the schools right now.
Brian Mahoney.
Here.
James Manny.
Here.
Chip McGarr.
Here.
David Palzetti, myself present. And that's it.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We'll move on to approval of the meeting. Well, thank you. We'll move on to approval of the meeting minutes. So I did send out, although a little bit late, the set of minutes from September 22nd, October 1st, and October 6th. The work session is considered a public meeting. There was a quorum, so that is included in the packet. So I know it's short order, but does anybody have any questions or?
I don't have any
Concerns?
questions, and I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, we'll move on to new business items. New correspondence, so I did post the latest correspondence as of last week on the website, and I sent out the link. Just for the community's benefits, all correspondence is batched in PDFs and posted on the website every Friday. So any emails that the committee gets, anybody's welcome to see, and any responses made. Does anybody have any follow-up on any correspondence up to date? No? Okay, with that, we'll move on. Chairperson's general correspondence and activities report. What I can generally report has been, there's been conversation between myself and Phil. We've been in constant communication over the past week. In addition, I've spoken with Mario from RIDE. The biggest goal, and you'll hear tonight, is trying to close some of the gaps. We've heard about, the market pressure for some of these projects, pushing it, and then where the RIDE reimbursements may end. So the goal here is to try to potentially close some of those gaps, look at ways that we can and trim down the project where possible, but still get an impactful project. So you'll hear more about that tonight, and that's really all I have under that item. Just as a reminder, we are going to be presenting to Town Council, or I will be, along with Phil, Brian Sylvia, our Finance Director, on the 12th, and under the Town Manager's report, under Jim's report. So we expect that to be a substantial presentation with a lot of information, and you'll hear some of that tonight from Phil. Does anybody have any questions on that item? Go ahead, Kate.
For project schedule and associated goals, I had a community member ask me for some updated dates, and my memory is not as good as it used to be. And so I went to the website to double check what I thought, and I noticed that the schedule that had the plan all mapped out, kind of, it's like that initial document that you get to. I think the dates aren't up to date. So if we can just double check those and make sure that that is reflective of our stage 2 submission, and just to make sure, because I know we made a
Master
shift.
schedule?
Yeah, we made a shift, and I just want to make sure it's up to date.
Yeah, because obviously we pushed last meeting was supposed to be on the 1st. Tonight wasn't on the schedule. We have the 15th on the schedule. I think.
Which I'm gonna, I don't know if this is the time to do it, but I want to talk about the 15th.
Okay.
Also.
We can
But
talk
just to
that
make
on
sure that master schedule gets updated, especially with the stage 2 submission date, I want to make sure that that is accurate.
That's a good point. I think what we should do is put it on the next agenda to revisit that entire schedule, because we really only took it through the holidays.
Yep.
And then it sort of ended. That was our first push. But now we have more information on where the process lies. I think we expected to be a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to readjust fire and redo that schedule. So at the next meeting, that way we can get the whole thing updated with a prospective schedule for everyone's benefit.
Yep.
Does that sound good? Okay, so I'll make that a point to put that on the agenda for the next meeting, whenever that is. We'll talk about the the next meeting date. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns on that item? No? Okay. Then we'll move on. Discussion and action on this, for the school committee to fill a current position for the long-term vacancy with a member who has knowledge of educational mission and function of facilities. So,
Just for 4B, the Facilities Condition Index.
oh, I'm sorry.
A little bit on that.
Yes,
I
I apologize.
no problem.
I skipped right over that.
So just to let everybody know, I met with Bureau Veritas yesterday at Curtis Corner. They toured the building. They got into every room possible. Standard size classrooms, specialist classrooms, principal, guidance, library, every nook and cranny in that building. The areas we've converted from the old wood shop, which is now kind of a creative space, the music rooms, and they took an index of everything that's currently there for heating systems, plumbing, and what the rooms are currently being used for. I want to give a shout out, even though he'll probably never see this, Sean from Michigan, who came out from their company, was up on that roof yesterday when it was downpouring, and he cataloged every rooftop unit we have up on Curtis Corner. The track, the fields, the field house went through and did their work based on the facility condition report they're putting together. And then today, which is a much nicer day, we did Wakefield. Toured it, old section, new section, both boiler rooms, rooftop. And then he did another tour of Curtis today for the outside grounds to see, compared to yesterday when it was downpouring, to look at the track, take updated photos, the parking areas and the back wooded areas and the tennis court areas. Does anyone have any questions on that end?
Do you know when they'll get back to you?
I should have an update tomorrow. He's gonna, not about when it'll be, but a rough timeline. Yeah.
Good.
Well, that'll be good. What was the situation with the water at CCMS when you went out there yesterday, as far as the track and grounds?
Just currently
Water
when we
or-
were walking it, or?
Yeah, you said you were out there in the rain. Did you-
Oh yeah, I mean, it was puddling up, it was wet and nasty, but, which I think was good in a way, so he could see, the pockets where you can tell there's been some drainage issues and where some have been alleviated, and he was able to see the track and how the track has its own, irrigation over there, so, and runoff.
So hopefully we'll get a schedule back so we can get the assessment done and get an answer on, because that's a big point, because if we meet the threshold, then we'll be eligible for the bonus. So thank you for doing that. Thanks for following up and moving that forward. No other questions on that? Okay, apologize for skipping that one. So we'll move on to the filling of the vacancy. So we had a member that was appointed, this position especially, which is a member who has knowledge of educational mission and function of the facilities, was an appointment by the school committee. The council had punted that one position over to the school committee. So I have an obligation as the chair to bring this up because this hasn't been filled since day one. We're operating on 8 members, and part of the whole premise of the 9 was to have a tiebreaker. So I think at this point, we need to have a formal request to put it to the school committee to fill. So I'm asking to the committee to consider that and whether we should do that.
We have a meeting on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, and I can just ask if we have time. I can ask if that can be put on Tuesday's agenda.
Okay, that'd be fine. I appreciate that. So we'll make that request. Try to get that vacancy filled. All right. Moving on, we have a presentation tonight by Studio Jade, so Phil's going to move through. And Phil, do you want to get connected and go ahead and put the slide deck?
Good evening, everyone. So what I have here tonight is a collection of slides that Luke and I can start putting together for the presentation to Town Council on Monday night. This is in draft form. There's some slides we may or may not show. It's really meant to spark some debate at this table and talk about whether they may be relevant for Monday night. This is probably our agenda for Monday night. To Town Council, we will want to introduce the project to them, quickly update them on what we've done. I do think it's important that they get a snapshot on what the status of the facilities are. Some Town Council members may not know. We want to talk about a high-level budget review, what the funding opportunities are, and then some options and prompts. And we can talk about that when we get there. I think it's important that the Town Council understand that we're looking at two particular items when we talk about the status of the facilities. Deferred maintenance, and those are projects that keeps students and staff warm, safe, and dry, and their HVAC, electrical, roofing, etc. And then the other group of projects are programmatic improvements. And those are projects that are student-centric, and they impact facilities, and they're focused on improving teaching and learning, and they can range from being extensive renovations, additions, new buildings, etc. Ones that focus on, in this particular case, at the high school, CTE spaces, athletics, the arts, maybe at the elementary school, the gymnasiums that we talked about, creating those project-based learning spaces at the middle school, those social and emotional health spaces that don't exist in the middle school, and maybe some of those small group learning and collaboration spaces. This is all based on those interviews that we've been conducting over the last 6 months at least, either at the school level or with the teachers themselves or through community forums. So I think it's important that they understand that there are two groups that we're looking at. They should also know that they have a 10-year forecast of facility needs that is over $100 million, and they should graphically see where the largest group of that money is going, which is the high school. And they should also have an idea of how that $100 million is spread out throughout the district and what we would consider a preliminary prioritization of the work. This is based on some meetings that we've had with Brian, trying to understand what are the more immediate needs at the school. So South Kingstown is looking at over $100 million over the next 10 years, but prioritized is about $37 million. And again, this is just deferred maintenance. This is keeping the buildings warm, safe, and dry, and protecting your assets. Then, if we wanted to look at the programmatic improvements, those ones that are student-centric, based on our meetings at the school and our community forums, Broad Rock has a minimal amount of investment, but there are some things that they need. West Kingston and Matunic, this includes that new gymnasium to try to bring equity amongst the elementary schools. Peacedale and Hazard Building have some needs, and for all intent and purpose at this point, we're not including the high school. So there's about $18 million in what we would call student-centric programmatic needs at this time. Some of those examples, Broad Rock, the OTPT, special spaces, the gym at West Kingston and Matunic, some project-based learning space at Peacedale, and some planning and resource and facilities at the Hazard Building. And when we look at the high school, there's a couple things we need to be mindful of. With a projected enrollment of about 703 students, there is a need to right-size the high school. Brian shared some energy invoices with us today. We're going to be looking at that to see, for comparison's sake, what you're spending on that existing high school as what a new high school or a right-sized high school would be, because there would be operational savings. And it's important to understand, for those that may not have been in the high school, and Chip, you can certainly validate this, that the current configuration and arrangement of that school does not easily support selective demolition. For example, if someone says, well, can we just take off that whole science wing building? The problem is the way the building has been laid out and built upon itself, you need that to be able to connect back to the cafeteria. So even if we're going to take off a major portion of the building, you're going to have to add back something to maintain that level of circulation. So it's the existing school is very, very challenging in terms of considerations for renovation. So we believe there are 3 opportunities to consider at the high school as it relates to the programmatic improvements. One would be a complete renovation to right-size the building at approximately $130 million. Number 2 would be to construct a new build, and we'll go through a formula somewhere between 100 to 125 million. And then if you wanted to maintain the existing building, complete the warm, safe, and dry work with some level of programmatic improvements, you're still looking at a significant investment of about 65 million. So we focused on a new build for the sake of this argument. So per the updated RIDE formulas for a new build, at 703 students for an academic high school with CTE. And I want to talk about this for a moment. Previously, I had advocated that we would make an argument for 225 square feet per student and make the case that this is an integrated CTE high school. Through some discussions with Chip, recognizing that only about 40% of the students are in CTE classes, and some discussions with the school building authority, it was suggested to not pursue 225 square feet per student. So I'm using the academic high school square footage of 200, with a caveat that we would try to request another 5,000 square feet for the CTE spaces. So I took 200 square feet per student. That equals 140,000. I would like us to make a case for 5,000 square feet more, for 145,600, and using the newly published guidance for square footage of 589, that would yield 85,758,400. But in addition to that, there are other funding sources: furniture, fixtures, and equipment, technology, building demolition, if there's any site remediation, swing space, maybe some athletic fields, not the stadium. And when we put all them in this formula, what's in the red bar is the 85,758,000. And when I add those other cost-ins for FF&E and demolition, et cetera, I come up with about 100 million. And of course, Mario, when he gives his presentation, can validate that, revise it, et cetera. But I believe that's where we are. Then, given the climate that we were in, recognizing that sometimes construction costs are challenged right now, we ran this estimate again with a more conservative approach, and we think the project may approach about 123 million. So at one time I had presented a $40 million delta. That was with a building that was much larger and more conservative estimating. This is a smaller building. We are seeing prices not come down, but they are leveling off, and we are following the news, and that there may be a less volatile market, but we still felt that it was prudent to offer a range in the estimate of a new high school. So the range right now is between 100 to 123 million. We do think at Monday's night there will be discussions for funding. And then these slides are not developed, but this is important. I'm interested in your feedback on this. When we present this to the town council, we really want them to maybe focus in on these 2 issues. One is asset protection of their buildings, right? Where do we want to protect, and to what extent do we want to protect our buildings? And then the programmatic enhancements, where and to what extent. And this is less driven by the town council in terms of school policy, but more so in terms of funding. And that's why I think there may be some discussion prompts for the town council. For example, as a town council, to what extent do we want to invest in our facilities? You know, as a town council, what do we think the appetite is of the community for borrowing money to make school building improvements? And as a town council, how do we feel about our financial position? So as Luke and I deliver this presentation on Monday night, do we think offering some discussion prompts at the end will help move the council forward in offering some guidance? Because we are at a point where we need some parameters on what projects to move forward. Though they don't drive school policy, it will be issuing these bonds, and the school committee needs to know, and the school building committee needs to know what is available to pursue. And that's all I have, Luke.
All right, thanks, Phil. I will put out there, we're still working on the financials. Some of this data is only a day old, right? So I had Steve Massaroni running from PFM running numbers today on what it would look like at the new gap numbers. And then I also had them run it at, if we didn't have bonuses, right? If we didn't have this 17.5% opportunity, what would be our baseline? Because that really is the baseline. If we miss this period, that's what we're looking at on that type of project. And I can tell you, it ends up about $1.2 million a year difference with those bonuses versus without on the $125 million project. So that's just one of the numbers that we'll be presenting, is saying, these are project considerations. Like it or don't, here's the numbers as we see them at this point based on what data we have. Mario will, and team will come up and they'll discuss that. One point is there's an expectation that the numbers may improve next year because that reimbursement rate may go up. That 589 was reevaluated and just put out. Because of our time period, that may increase before we initiate the project, which may improve the numbers. But we can only go off the data that we have today, and we want to be honest with that. So as we run the numbers, and I'm working with Brian close, and Brian was working on the tables today to look at the tax rate impact all the way down, what would be the average impact, and we'll be working tomorrow and likely over the weekend to continue that process. So with that, I'll kick it to the committee for any questions of Phil on the presentation, or any concerns or any suggestions you'd like to see us present at that meeting. Dave, I'll go to my right again, just because I have a habit of that.
I probably should know this answer, but are the reimbursement rates the same if it was a renovation than if it was a new construction? We have what you presented was what the reimbursement would be, or the total project cost, and then my question would be, does the 589 change if it's a renovation?
So, yeah, this goes into our discussion. We're limited by the new cost, right? I think this goes into that point.
Correct. The 589 is the RIDE guidance for new construction. A significant renovation will come with our Stage 2 submission and the third-party cost estimate. And then during the review process, the School Building Authority will validate that number and either support it or challenge it based on the estimate that we provide and any estimates that they engage in during the review.
So if it's new construction, it's 589 for the reimbursement period.
Correct.
But if it's a renovation, it's more of a discussion based on market value. It could be more than 589, or is it capped at 589?
I wouldn't even know how the 589 gets figured into a renovation. It's just, we would provide school building authority with an estimate based on the scope of work, and then they have their resources to validate that. And then they will respond.
So that might be a good question for Mario when they come up. I'm not trying to shoot you down, but it might be a more appropriate question for the SBA to. What we did get, and Mario probably addressed this, is on a renovation, I did get clarity on this in my discussions throughout the week, is before Phil had iterated some dialogue that a renovation had no cap on reimbursement. And that's not necessarily true. What I've received and can be validated is RIDE will not give you more than what a new build would be. So that 101 million would be our cap number whether we did a renovation or we did new. Because if we can build new, they obviously would like us to build new for that number and not do $130 million on an old building. Is that a fair statement, Mario? Okay.
Well, that kind of answers the question.
I think that's where you're
Yeah,
going.
I mean, my question was the of what the impact on the town would be. So, if it was that the reimbursement would be higher for a renovation, even though the cost for a renovation and new build would be the same, the reimbursement would be higher. But that's not the case.
It's not the case. It's the same either way. Whether we do renovation or new build, the cap number is the same.
So that answers my question, so thanks.
Is that it? Okay. Kate?
So I have just a concern with the elementary gyms, and I know that one of our goals were to say if we're gonna do, we're gonna touch the buildings, one of our drivers was equity. But I would like to know if that was something that that could be kind of compartmentalized and say, now with these investing something like adding a gymnasium on 2 buildings and with the price tag that goes with it, I know we're supposed to be planning 5 years out for this purpose, for RIDE purpose, but if we're if we're being responsible and actually looking 10 to 15 years out in theory, we don't know that we're gonna have 3 elementary schools 20 years from now. So why would we put 2 gymnasiums on buildings that we might not have in 10 years or 15 years? So if there was a way to pocket that out and say, yes, it's almost like building a Lego set, like you could do this, but we're probably not gonna do it right now maybe, but it's there. And then the other question I have is, I know we're projected for 700 students, but what many high schools are facing right now that have done new builds is they are now looking at, they have no room and they have people coming in. I think East Providence right now is looking at they're bringing in so many new students want to get into their new facilities that now their building is too small. It's not too small, but is it possible to plan for a little bit of growth and say, I understand that RIDE's only going to reimburse up to 700 students, but maybe we should plan for 750 or 800 to be safe, because if all of a sudden people want in, or people start migrating back with younger kids from the South County area to have a little wiggle room so that we're not maxed out. I don't know if you answer that, we answer it, or whoever does, but those are just things that popped into my head while you were going through. And the only other point, I guess, would be that number, that the 100 to 125 million was only for the high school.
Yes.
So at some point, and I won't speak for the town council because they're gonna, you'll give them what they want, but I would say having a tally, right? So we had the numbers without the high school, and then you have the high school number, and so just do like a total. Would be helpful.
So the framework, I can answer the first question. So the framework that we've discussed is, we'll have high school, renovation is equal to new build. So we'll have one number for high school, big number. Programmatic, deferred maintenance, SOLBIC, whether it's renovation or new, which it's pointing us in the direction of new. And then we have warm, safe, and dry with some programmatic at the 65 million. Those are the 2 run options on the financials for that. Then it becomes a little bit of an a la carte without getting too crazy, but you mentioned elementary schools. You have warm, safe, and dry, deferred maintenance, and then you have sort of the enhanced option, which includes the gymnasiums, enhanced programmatic. So what do those look like? And then the same thing would be a breakdown number for Broad Rock. So there's a bit of a sort of an a la carte menu that is, each one's broken down to the tax rate and what the impact would be. So you can kind of cobble things together and get a whole number, knowing that ultimately that number will be passed on to the school committee. School committee may say, well, we're going to reshuffle it a little bit with that money sort of framework, but the guidance comes in as like, here's our framework as far as financials and where we're going. And they're getting the feedback from council on where they sit. That's sort of the intent. Does that fit with what you're thinking? All right. So it sounds like we're on the right track. That's good to know. And then Mario, I'm sure, can answer some of the other questions that you had. Chip? Quiet tonight? All right. Jim?
Thank you, Luke. Well, I'm very happy to see these numbers come down from where they were, so I appreciate you really tweaking them and really starting to focus on what we can and can't do will be on December 12th. Anyone that's watching at home and for anyone in the room right now, December 12th is going to be an interesting meeting with the town council because we really need to present to them all the different options, the costs, the tax rates, the debt service, and the possible bond rating change. We are one of 5 cities or towns that have the highest bond rating in the state, AA1, and that is a concern. You know, we're trying to get some answers on how the bond rating could be affected on what that magic number is. And, you know, there's a broad range, so we're really trying to pin that down for Monday. I have a question similar to Dave's, though, and deferred maintenance, and I don't want any to read into this question, I'm just curious. Deferred maintenance, if it's a large number, what type of reimbursement do we get for that, if at all? Do we get anything on deferred maintenance?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we
The 30%, not the, I mean, would the 30, would we
No,
be eligible for more?
Mario
the
can chime in more,
35%.
but we'd likely get that, depending on the bonuses we qualify for, that would qualify for any of the quote-unquote deferred maintenance. I mean, deferred maintenance is more than painting the walls, you know, you're talking HVAC, plumbing, electrical, you know, type improvements, so that would qualify.
And I know I'm a little, not off topic, but I'm just throwing everything at you. I mean, the concern I have as a town manager with these numbers, and Luke and I talk about this every day. And Brian Sylvia and I talk about this every day. He's really good with numbers, and I'll give him something to look at, and within a half hour I have my answers. But the interest rates are high for bonds. They're nearly double what they were a year in October of '21, and they're going up another 0.5%. They projected the Feds this month. So those are the big concerns that we're going to have to discuss and look at and bring to the council's attention. But thank you. That's it.
Brian, you know, you going to take a hard pass tonight? All right. All right. Phil, do you have anything else to bow tie this up, or are you good? So just so everyone knows, we have that end of the presentation, really the building presentation. Bond was mentioned. We have a bond assessment. That, I will tell you, there's always a big asterisk on all of these numbers, right? We're early in the process. There's no definites. We're trying to go off the information we have. So even the bond impact numbers, you know, Moody's Investments has the way of rating that has changed recently. So there's some, even from our financial advisor, a little bit of, it could be X, it could be Y. So we're going to have to explain that to council and run through that, and but it's a consideration. And also explaining what that means. What does it mean to get downgraded, and what impact does that have? Because there's the feeling of having that great bond rating, and there's also an actual impact on potential interest rates for future borrowing. So that's all going to be explained, gone over, et cetera. So, and Brian will be there to kind of run through everything with me. So.
I'm curious, is there a heavy agenda Monday night?
Well, this is going to be the focal point. So we kept the agenda fairly light for everything else because it's, you know, this is come due that we really need to sit with the council and start getting some direction. I just want to clarify one thing about the bond rating. We're not being penalized for, you know, we would not lose our bond rating, lose the highest number as a penalty of any type. It's just our debt service is so low in this town right now that anything we borrow in substantial amounts could possibly change our bond ratings. So we have a very low debt service right now. I think it's measured around $1 million and change a year. So that's what that's all about.
Just say something.
Yeah.
which I think is great, but it also means we haven't been spending money on large projects, which is why our schools are where they are. So while it's respectable, and I understand keeping your eye on it because you don't want to just blow it out of the water. At the same time, it's like we still need a big project for our schools, and not even just our schools, but in keeping a bigger mind, other things as well. I'm sure that are not part of the school.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I don't want
Yeah.
to read into this. I'm not saying we're not. I'm just saying, this is a council and school committee decision. But we want to make sure that everyone is well-informed when they're making these decisions. That's all.
All right. Anything else on that topic before we move on? All right, then I'll introduce the SBA team. Do you want to come up to the table? And yeah, Brian, would you mind sliding down? That way those two can come together. And so I wanted to have the opportunity to have SBA representation here tonight. I think it's more impactful to hear direct information from the state representatives who are providing potential reimbursements. And this is our opportunity, and also open up to the public to ask direct questions of you, and hopefully you can fill us in as much as possible. I guess to start off, if you want to make any opening statements or walk us through any of the general timeline and where the current market is from your standpoint. And if you want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. Mario Carreño from RIDE. I'm here with Kelia Cantor. I want to thank Brian for taking us through the facilities today. He's very knowledgeable and a great asset to the school district and the town. Two things. I know Luke had reached out, asked us to join here, but as part of our process, we're supposed to come anyways, so we figured we would do a 2-for-1. So we'll do an overview of our process, which we need to do anyways, so then we can go through timelines and questions, and then we get into some of the details of financing and opportunities for this project. So I don't know if you want to, Keely, you want to do the overview?
Sure. So you have already submitted your Stage 1 application, and as was previously mentioned, you'll be submitting your Stage 2 in February. At that time, we will be reviewing the Stage 2. We will reach out if we have any additional information that we need or any questions. You'll provide us with that supplemental information, and then we'll prepare a packet to present to the council for their review and approval. Once that happens, you'll receive a memorandum of agreement, which will outline exactly how much we are agreeing to fund for your project. And then you'll move into the schematic design phase, where you'll develop that design more thoroughly. We will meet with you to review it. We'll also review it at the design development and the construction documents phase, at which point you'll proceed into the fun part, which is the actual implementation of all your projects. Am I missing anything on that, Mario? No.
Yes, I mean, are there any, so we toured the schools, we went to Peacedale, which is actually a great little building. I think, we have RIDE is releasing an outdoor classroom grant, and I think there's an area we found there that school would be perfect for it. I would recommend that you guys apply. It's going to be released on Tuesday, $100,000 per school who's picked, and I can't see any reason why that building wouldn't get one of the awards. So I would highly recommend that. The middle school looked to be in great shape. I will say for both of those, and as we go to the deferred maintenance piece, they are eligible for reimbursement. And part of it is you want to pick projects that are a combination of health and safety, because that gets you extra state aid, but also educational enhancements, which are not only benefit the kids, but that students, teachers, taxpayers, and residents can actually see. So one of the most important projects that are done are not necessarily the roof and the windows, it's the projects that people see, because otherwise they won't give you any more money. If money can get buried in roofs and windows and fire sprinklers, but the building still looks like it's 70, 80 years old, which isn't that. So, just at Peacedale, that library is an amazing space. With a facelift, that thing could be amazing. Same with the middle school. It's just, at Peacedale there was encyclopedias that are 23 years old for dictionaries. I'm not sure what second and third grader uses dictionaries that are this thick now. Like, times have changed, so that's one where if you look at some of the communities in our state, they are making these shifts from libraries to media centers with flexible learning spaces that the kids see right away, but taxpayers and residents who use those spaces go, this is an inviting space, and I see where my tax dollars are going, which is a big thing. We saw those two, and then we did the walkthrough of the high school. I think one of the questions you had earlier was about renovation spaces and the caps. So for individual spaces, yeah, it's not realistic necessarily to have that because there's no efficiency. So is there a scenario where a renovation is $2,000 a square foot? Sure, for a select space, but on scale, the state will never pay more for a renovation than for a new construction. It just doesn't make sense in that case. One of the things that you had mentioned, Luke, that I was listening to there is that when you have PNC running the calculations without bonuses, I would remove. Don't even do that, because if you miss out here on bonuses, this is a failure. So 17.5% is on the table here for something of 80 to 100, whatever it ends up your number being. But if you miss that deadline because we can't get on track, that's when you factor in just project costs, but as well as interest reimbursement, it's over $25 million that shifts from the state to South Kingston taxpayers. That's a big number, and you totally control that schedule. So let's make sure that you make it. There shouldn't be any scenario where you're doing these calculations like that. That's a failure if it gets to there. So that's one piece. One recommendation and suggestion from your PowerPoint is that your centerpiece is this new high school, right? That's the centerpiece, and you have a bunch of things that are wants, and you can debate, the level of investment at those schools. I would just focus on that one piece because it takes a lot of time for your architect to even get that to a place to stage 2, that if you can get consensus on what that is, if it's going to be at the Columbia Street side or somewhere else, I assume based on the way the vote went last time that Columbia Street is probably the preference. You do a new build there, but get consensus on a number, if it's going to be the high school, and then let them start designing, and then you can have other conversations on what do we do at Peacedale, what are we going to do at Matunic, what do we do there, because those can be picked up very quickly. You also want to know the parameters from the town council. What's even available? Is it 80 million? Is it 120? Is it others? You need to have a firm number. One of the things we work with Luke's other community, Coventry, is their ceiling is 96 million. So we're not going to entertain any plans that are above that because it's just spinning your wheels. There's actually no money to support that. Further, their town council has set a bar that they don't want to max out their bonding capacity. So we're just working within what they've set because we know that's what will get approval. So I think this meeting will be critical on Monday to understand that, because if there is no support for 130, then let's stop talking about that. If there's no support for 120, then let's not look there. If it's 110 or 100 million, then that's where you should focus. I think the other piece, the 200 square feet per student, is at the high end of what we would approve, right? That's not the minimum, that's the most we would approve. So you can even find efficiencies within there. You can continue to refine that number, though there's probably a balance with the concerns you raised of adding extra students. Just doing the calculation that was shown there, if for some unexpected reason you had 150 students arrive overnight, you would still be at close to 170 square feet per student, which is still high. So I think you have that. I think you might even be able to get some more efficiencies, because the goal is to align what you bond for with rides number. You don't necessarily want to go, you could. So I think some communities have. Barrington and East Providence said, we're going to build whatever we want. So the state will reimburse us here, we want this, and they paid for it, which is, you can do so. But there's many other communities who say, you know what, we want every dollar to be reimbursed, so we're going to match this number. So that's just a choice, again, that you will have. They can write the enabling legislation however they want. You can put the rules on it so that every dollar is reimbursed, if that's a requirement of the town council, but that's a local decision how high you go. The other piece is our number. These are preliminary because we don't even know what you're doing, right? So it's, we can say that it'll be that. It could be higher, right? It could be lower. We have new square feet numbers coming out next year, likely when you get approved. So there's still some flux, but I'm pleased to see that initial gap, which I saw, which was I think 50 million, which is, let's get that down to as close to zero as possible. Yes, sir.
Because there's an obvious concern that we get into the project, and then, either climate changes or, we're already looking at a gap. right? So let's say we get into the project and we find there is a gap, like we try to whittle it down, and we say, all right, we'll go to 170 and we'll tweak the numbers, and we'll make the picture look better, and we get into the project and we're short. Does RIDE come back and make us whole on the rest?
So it's a great question. So at the moment, we don't know if there's a gap, right? We're assuming there's a gap, but we're likely going to use next year's square feet numbers for your project. So it'll be probably higher than the 589 that's there. It might be 6 something. So there might not be one. What other communities have done who are in this situation is that they'll use their bond premium to cover things that the state wouldn't pay for. So Newport is one, for example, who was approved at around, I think, $98.5 million for 700, actually very similar here, but they actually built it at their career tech centers. They built it bigger than they needed. They ended up getting, I think, 14 or 15 million in premium, which they did, and they added on additional projects that they wanted. Providence did that, Lincoln did it, Johnston did it. We're hoping the Coventry will do it, and others. So that's a strategy that many are doing, is that while interest rates are still shifting around, the bond premium market is still robust, where you can get perhaps 10% more than what you issue. You can actually get towards the project cost if you choose. Some communities will use it to reduce debt. That's a choice that you would make, but most...
Explain the bond premium.
Okay, so let's say it's a $100 million bond to make the math easy. In many cases, and this is more of a recent phenomenon, you have investors who overpay what it's worth. So even though you issue a $100 million bond, you end up with $110 million in many cases. You don't pay back that $10 million. That $10 million is on the investors. However, some communities will take that $10 million and actually only issue $90 million. So they take a $90 million bond, and then $10 million of premium still gets them their $100 million project. So part of that is a local decision. I think the Newport City Council voted to go above, and Lincoln, they voted to go above, but many other examples, North Providence took it within, and a few others. Just a matter of need and preference. You likely would have needs that will exceed this bond, right? So that's a strategy, but you won't know until you go to sell your bond whether, what that amount is, and you can even do a blended rate. Lincoln did, I think it was 7 over and then 4 of it underneath. So even though they had voter approval for 60 million, they only issued 57 million in debt, and then they ended up with almost $68 million in proceeds. So that you can get creative with this. Providence set it up so that part of their bond premium covered the first 2 years of payments, so that taxpayers didn't have to pay anything. So you can get very creative. And then the most recent ones, Johnston and Newport, took that money and put it directly into their projects because of how the markets have gone up higher than they've expected, but it's a way to counteract that.
The reason I brought that up is it starts getting complicated really quick. And so I don't want to get buried in the minutia at this point. I think we need to get some round numbers and some rails set up. And then even if we get authorization to pull a certain amount of money, we could always short it as well. We don't have to pull this whole amount of money. If we get a project cost that's less after we bid, or we go to a certain model, we don't have to spend every dollar. So that's the limit.
So let me ask a question here then. Is there a thought of when, assuming Monday goes well and then, you will advance some number, when would an election be? Have you guys hammered that down yet? Yeah.
We've had some general discussion. The general thinking at this point was to, I think, have it in more of the fall, right? And we had an early discussion on that. And I know it leaves us a little short on time. We could set everything up with the consultant and get everything prepped for that. There was a feeling by the committee that it was, as getting past the summer, having more time to explain the project would be better, especially since we're coming off a failed bond vote. So getting that public outreach and really explaining the project, giving people time to weigh in and vent maybe, would be a welcome thing. So by the point where we're entering the school year again, there'd probably be a better time, we're thinking, to go ahead and move forward with the bond vote.
Okay, no, it's great, yeah, because some communities, Middletown, for example, is doing a spring bonds, but their timeline is really tight. That's why I was asking that, if you were looking to do an April or May vote, you likely would need to decide something, at least on a number, within the next few weeks to send it to the General Assembly to then get approval. But you have until the end of June, so you have some time here for that. So that's good.
Yeah, and I think I expressed to you, we're looking to do the stage 2 more towards a June 1st deadline for us, for the September, maximum deadline submittal. So that, and you had expressed, I think, that would be optimal for you to review because it's off time, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody, so do we have questions on the reimbursement specifically? Right now, we're anticipating, I want to validate a few things while you're here. So we're anticipating that we could get upwards of 17.5%, which is half of our base housing aid. We're counting on potentially the FCI coming over 65%. That's kind of our last 2.5%. Is that a fair assumption at this point?
Yeah, I think the one piece that we want to make sure so it's health and safety, educational enhancement. The one piece that we want to make sure we connect is this newer and fewer piece with the buildings that we want to make sure that it's not like they're not on their own track and then you're just doing this high school separately. So let's, as part of your investments at Peacedale, for example, if they're going to receive the 5th grade from a building that's closing, then maybe you do something there as part of this approval to make it very clear that this is all one interconnected decision. So. But yeah, so that would be the third one, and then that leaves you with, I know the consultants were here today to review, so that's one route. The other route we discussed, but it's available only on the new high school, not on a renovated one, is there's an energy bonus that's also at play that is as a fallback to this, though that one isn't as generous in terms of combining with other projects, where that one would be limited to your high school project, whereas if this thing trips to 65, then any other projects that you do likely would also get the maximum.
Is the energy bonus relegated to that threshold as well? Like, are we still maxed out, or is the energy bonus available above
No,
your maximum?
It's a great question. It's at that 52.5% max. Though I will say that there are many communities now who are making a push to try to raise the minimum, which might be of interest to South Kingstown. To raise it from 35 to 40, which then, if that happens this session, and you get 4 bonuses, then you would actually get all 4 of the bonuses. So you can get perhaps 60% reimbursement. But we won't. I mean, I wouldn't plan for that. Like, plan for this would be extra, and perhaps engage the other communities who are pursuing this and see. But we did a calculation. I think. So we reached out to Middletown. They've already hired a lobbyist to try to push this through. The commissioner is on board with this. We've sent something to the governor's office as well. I know the League of Charter Schools would be interested because it would capture everyone. And I think that in the foreseeable future, Middletown is preparing some document that they would send out to the other minimums to have perhaps the town council pass a resolution to engage your senators and reps to letting them know that this would be of interest. So that would get you another 7.5% if that goes through up to 60, which would change things. But I wouldn't, again, like plan on the 52. That would just be an extra surprise that comes through.
Well, if you get a resolution, send it our way, because certainly if we can save money, we're all for that. Validating a couple other things that we've discussed, just fields. We've talked about this. Off-site fields, we've talked about possible to get reimbursement. Has to be new build, correct? No renovation of existing?
No,
Is that a fair statement or no?
we might entertain renovations of like like fencing, lights. Is that what you're talking about?
Substantial renovation, or?
And other regular.
I think we don't cover turf, right?
That's right.
We don't cover turf, but if you were doing, lighting enhancements, especially if there's a benefit to the community or a safety enhancement that you're making, those would be eligible.
When you say turf, synthetic turf, or are you talking about
Synthetic
grass, or, okay, on a renovation? But if it's a brand-new field like East Providence, do you not cover
We
synthetic
don't
turf,
cover any
period?
synthetic turf.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Is East Providence?
They paid for that.
Okay, so you won't cover that surface?
No, but others, so I think a few years ago, North Kingstown applied, and so what we did was, like, we won't pay for the field itself, but they needed fencing, they needed ADA access, parking, bathrooms, they needed lighting, drainage. We paid for all that, but the field itself is where the issue is. Now, if you're doing a new field, so Foster Gloucester had a forest that they cut down and actually built a new field that we paid for that. So resurfacing is one of the issues that regulations won't allow. So if you have an existing field and you do something on it, regardless if it's grass or artificial turf, it's not allowed. But I think we don't allow artificial turf anywhere. We would allow a new grass field if you chop some trees down and build it somewhere else.
Okay, that's good to know, because I wasn't aware of that. I don't know if you guys were. So synthetic turf's been discussed, so that's an important aspect of this. Field houses, I saw in the regulations, that's a hard no.
That's correct.
New track? Is that in the same realm as the turf, or is
Yeah,
that?
we've paid for track.
Mario, I have a question. Say all goes well, the council gives us a thumbs up with a number. School committee, everything's lining up. The voters, we put it out to a vote, the voters approve it. What are the parameters that we have to put the shovel in the ground? Because the question that's coming up to me numerous times, actually, is because everything's so volatile right now, interest rates, the economy, uncertainty, people are nervous. Like, I think if they're for the project, but they're like, how long could we wait to see if things settle down? Like, so what is that time frame that we would be able to wait before we put a shovel in the ground?
It's a great question. At the moment, it's not much time. So the General Assembly ends the bonuses at the end of next year. You just have to have a signed contract in place. Like, so maybe your contract gives you some wiggle room where you sign it and you can wait, I guess. But usually, historically, waiting, even if things calm down, you end up paying more anyways if you wait for too long. But again, if the General Assembly moves that, then you would have a little bit more wiggle room. But at the moment, I would aim for that date as we need to have something signed by December 30th of 2020. Otherwise, we jeopardize.
Go over that date again, December what?
30th, 2023. So
Okay.
a signed contract with the contractor for a building. We don't expect them to start over the winter break, just knocking things down. So there's no expectation for that. But as long as you have something in place, ready to go, it qualifies as being in starting construction by that day, which gives you that 17.5% of extra state aid on the bond.
Great, thank you.
Dave, did you have a?
I wanted to pull back on the field discussion. So if we were to build a new field and do it with a grass surface, you would reimburse up to that. Is it possible that we show the delta increase for going to turf? You'd still pay for the original base field, and then we'd only be responsible for fundraising the additional money for the, because there's very different constructions. You build a turf field, you've got an irrigation system. You build a grass field, you have an irrigation field. If you build a turf field, you've got gravel underneath it, and it's a different construction method, different costs. So it'd be very hard for, I think, the architect to come up and say, we're going to build a track with a hole in the middle, and then you guys fill in the rest.
Yeah, usually in these cases, like, they'll design it, and then it's like, all right, this is the cost that is yours, and then, the track and the fencing and the parking, goes to the state for reimbursement. It would be a hard sell, your question. I think it's a interesting one, to be honest, but I would likely say that it wouldn't apply. That's right.
Fair enough. Any others? Brian, from facilities aspect, anything? No? And Chip? Haven't heard from you. Anything? No? What's that? Yeah, I will. So if we have no more committee comments, I'll request that any public comment that wants to be on this particular agenda item, if you have any questions or want to come up and speak on this issue, feel free. No questions? We have the authority here, so come on up if you want to just come to the podium. Yeah, the question's why no synthetic
Right.
turf?
So I'm just concerned because I think about synthetic versus grass and all the maintenance and all that. Just if you could explain that.
I wish I could, but it is in the regulations. That's really the understanding that I have. I don't know what the history of how it ended up in the regulations.
Is there a process to change those regulations? And if we were interested in pursuing that, how could we do that? Just curious.
It's a big undertaking that the Department of Education would first have to agree to engage that. Usually, you don't open it for one particular item.
Right.
You open it because you're going to do wholesale changes, and then that takes, on its own, it takes like a year usually to go to different stakeholders, see what sections we're changing, which ones we're not, and then it gets put through. But these haven't changed since 2007. So, I mean, Could they perhaps be due for an upgrade? Perhaps so, but they've worked consistently throughout the state for 15 years.
Right, so what would be the process if you, so do you write to the commissioner? Do you talk to your legislators? How do you advocate for change? Just
Yeah,
curious.
you can write a letter, and then you'd have to get the department to agree to consider engaging a change for a field.
Okay. Because I just think about what Mr. Paladez said, he said about irrigation and maintenance and all of that, just, I'm wondering why, but that's all.
I think I figured out why.
Why?
2007, the cost of a synthetic field was incredible. In 2023, it is not. So the delta is really small now. Back then turf fields were here, grass fields were here. Now it's like down here.
So I wonder if it's worth doing, I wonder if it's
Yeah, well,
worth,
I don't know if we have the time, but we can plan, and if it changes before we get there, and
right?
maybe it changes. But yeah, that's most likely why.
So the process is to write a letter to the commissioner?
Yes, I mean, realistically, they're not going to change regulations for a field. But I believe that there's a section that allows like waivers or special consideration that would be a better avenue to pursue, that if you make a case, and maybe the rationale is that turf or synthetic fields were X more expensive and now it's actually cheaper, and or some more, and then, you know, there's a formal variance process and you're complying with this, that would be a better route. I think changing the regulations for a field is a non-starter, just because there's 50 pages and then you have, well, it's not just that, then you have the construct, well, let's remove prevailing wage, let's do this, and then we end up, it would take multiple years, to be honest with you, and your project would probably be done before we wrap that up.
If you go that route,
The waiver.
the waiver route, one of your more compelling arguments would be the cost savings of maintenance. If
Right,
you can
that's-
demonstrate that over time, that would probably be.
Yeah, exactly. That's the angle we look at. We look at the delta between a turf field versus a grass field, and then you look at the maintenance, irrigation, striping costs, and you could actually make a pretty good estimate. We could put a solid waiver request in. Whether or not it gets approved would be fine.
Thank you very much.
Would you
as well.
recommend over a specific amount of time, like over 5 years, 10 years, lifetime of the field? Would you recommend like a range for that?
Lifetime would probably make sense.
Well, I'm just thinking about, we have water bans in South Kingstown, we can't water, so then we destroy the field, then it's a cycle that's really not good for specifically down here. So just interesting, and then I just wanted to say thank you, because it was very interesting. All of the information you provided was really helpful, and I do appreciate it. Thank you for coming down.
Good points, and Phil, hopefully registering that on the waiver, but it is a big deal, and I know a lot of firms have canned arguments where it's like, here's the lifetime of grass of a 15-year life cycle, here's synthetic, and there's other aspects, playability and whatnot, all of which you probably know, and I'm sure you've heard from other communities, but we'll give it a shot.
And I would add in things that happened this year that we would not have anticipated before. Travel that wound up be coming into play because we couldn't play on our grass field this year for a while, and so there was additional travel, having to move, rental of other facilities that if you got a similar drought like that would come into play again.
So just to clarify, though, it wouldn't be that we wouldn't be allowed to use turf, it would that they just wouldn't reimburse
Pay
that.
for it. Yeah.
Right, all right. We could still put it there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a beat on what our pathways are at this point. I mean,
Use them for every dollar.
Well, they're pretty clear. No turf.
yeah. The answer is no unless, right?
I mean, the other pathway is then to narrow the gap of your actual high school, right? So make that exactly aligned, so that if you didn't win this request, that you're still better off than having a $20 million gap between the two. That's the other approach. And I would also hammer down, like, get your high school set before we pursue this field in a way, like
I mean, location-wise,
everything. Like, let's have like
this is the plan.
because this can be, your field would be somewhere else, I believe, right?
Yeah.
If it is that we can have, those conversations can be in March, they can be in April. You can write letters, and multiple letters throughout the summer if you wanted, but he needs to start working on something, and it doesn't make sense to talk about this when the $100 million question, it remains unanswered.
Yeah. Greg, go ahead.
To me, the $589 a square foot seems pretty lean. I mean, houses around here are going for $450 a square foot. you said it might be going up next year. I mean, up to like 600 or up to like 800, do you think?
It's too early to tell. I mean, the 589 also doesn't include the other items that they add in. So I think if you do I don't have it in front of me, but like the true square foot cost, it's already in the 650 range when you add in technology, furniture, demolition. So that's not in the base number. So the number, do you have it? Yeah, so it's about 650 is the true number that is being paid now.
I wouldn't like doing it, but the high-end average, you said, is 200 square feet per student?
That's the max we would reimburse, correct?
What's the least?
You can go lower. So we have, there's charter schools who operate at 100 square feet per student.
I don't believe in going smaller like that, but just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going that low, but there is 200 square feet is
Maximum.
and it's quite large actually.
Yeah, right. But that include, is that just on the classrooms, or does that include the gymnasium and?
The whole building is designed there, and then you can choose within, like, that's what we do. A number of kids times that square feet gives you the overall number we reimburse, and then you can play what you want. Smaller classrooms, you want bigger gyms, like you can shift within the overall scope. There is guidance on specific spaces, but you can through a process, if you want to make this your classrooms, let's say 700 square feet instead of 900 because you have learning commons, well, great, we can do that as long as it fits in within the overall max that we've established.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to interject with a question. What is we obviously have a maximum of 200. You're saying some schools operate off 100, and I'll point this to Phil as well. These are national standards on a high school, I'm assuming that. What is the correct square footage per student on a programmatically correct high school?
It's very individualized, the kind of program you're delivering. So, for example, if you have a very active hands-on classroom, like a CTE or a science lab, you're going to have larger square footage per student. If you're talking about an English seminar where students are largely sitting and working in small groups or having discussions, then it's smaller space. And that's all going to come into play when your designers are working with your educators, because hopefully what they will do is sit down with them and talk about the specific kind of programs they're delivering, what kind of furniture they see in the space, and that's really going to help them determine what the appropriate square footage is. So again, as Mario said, if let's say you have a very specialized CTE program, like a robotics program, and you know that you've got these large pieces of equipment in there that you need to accommodate, then you're going to want to probably go beyond the recommended, 2,000 square foot CTE space to, safely accommodate those students. And that's fine. That just means that you're going to have to pull that additional square footage from another location. A lot of times we see it being pulled from admin spaces, right? So a lot of our regulations in terms of square footages were written, 20 years ago. So you don't need the large admin spaces that you used to have because you're not dealing with as much paper, your computers are smaller, so you can get away with a little bit smaller office space than you did before, and that space can be reallocated to an educational need or an athletic need but that will get teased out through your design process.
I think the concern is that it's like chicken and egg through this process, right? We're trying to carve out numbers based on estimated square footages, but we need to have a building program to kind of back into what we need. But we're having this conversation around Broad Rock, which was built 20 years ago, about classrooms being too small. And perhaps it's because they backed out numbers and they went with lesser square footage, and now you end up, so this is where, I don't know how other committee members are, but this is where I kind of struggle in the process of finding that right balance and not running us short, but also, being responsible financially to ensure we don't overbuild, so. Do you have anything? I don't know what the...
Chip, you're getting a stand-up desk only. A stand-up desk, nothing else around you.
So if you recall, about a month or so, we were at the high school for many days, meeting with all of the department heads. And Dr. Moretti has developed a program based on the needs and wants. As you can imagine, that needs and wants is bigger than where we're at, but not too far. It was about 157,000. So if the needs and wants were 157,000, and we may be looking at about 145,000, that's not a significant amount of square footage to tease out through a design process that, we are accelerating for this Stage 2 submission. Stage 3 is much more protracted and engages with the school building authority and your group a lot more. So I live in the area that you're concerned about, this gray area. I can tell you that it works out. I don't know how it does, but it does at the end. It's just a constant push and pull to make things fit, align, satisfy, etc. So I can only say, don't be scared, but it is a little bit of a gray area, but it does all work out.
Architects live in the gray. Accountants live, I'm married to an accountant. They live in black and white, or black and red, I should say.
So do town managers, by the way.
Yeah, so that's the issue, is where you have gray rubbing up a very finite, financial picture. But, as I said earlier, we're going to have an asterisk on here, and we're going to have to live in the gray for a while. All right, anything else? Any other questions? Any other comments from the room? All right. Go ahead, Brian.
Something that just popped into my head, and from Rye's perspective, and Phil might be able to answer this too. If there was a design process that kept certain elements of the high school and then, say, demoed 80% of it, is that considered a new build if you're demoing 80% and keeping 20? Or if we kept the theater and another section, is that still a new build if we're building out from there all the educational space?
Yeah, I mean, there's those who've done ad renos, and that piece qualifies. A lot of times the piece you don't touch won't. I mean, the trade-off, though, with the ad reno is you're going to spend almost as much as the new building. It's going to look and feel like the old one. And then 10 years from now, people are going to say, where'd our money go? And then there's no more bond capacity because you've just used it. So I would, and this is just, coming from the state, I would always pick a new school over an ad reno of that size. You also have an extra 100,000 square feet in that building that is oversized, which means you are heating and cooling spaces. I counted at least 4 or 5 bathrooms that were closed off. They aren't even used. And I'm sure there's more than that. I mean, you have a lot of space there. Hallways that don't end, stairwells that go into who knows where, and everything. You're heating and cooling all these. I mean, what are the bills for this building? It's probably outrageous what you're paying.
But we have seen, though, districts where they've had an oversized auditorium, like East Providence, and they kept that and then built their new structure
So
around
that's,
it.
and I'm guessing that's what you're referring to, because we have as you noticed last week, we have a really nice large auditorium. It needs updating. For you get to sit on the stage. Those of us who had to sit in the seats that tilted us all forward. It does need updating and renovating inside of it, but the idea would be we would hate to lose such a large, actually nice space. It's probably the nicest space in the high school. So the question would be, would we be able to just box it out and do everything else demolished and new build and then reno the?
You could. I would. So East Providence is actually doing that for Martin Middle School, but only because they've already invested in their auditorium. This one needs investment. So I would at least do the calculation of. So we'll reimburse for auditoriums, though not likely that size. So maybe that's where you pay an extra $2 million, right? Because you want an extra 500 seats in there, and the community says, well, we're going to use it. We'll pay for that. That delta, that makes sense. I would do that calculation because renovating that space is going to. And then building around it might be way more expensive than just tearing everything down. That's right. You might want to put it somewhere else on that site, and just, if you want to add an extra 500 seats, great. Then he'll do the math. He'll say it's $2 million, great. And then you'll get 100 out of the 102 reimbursed, something like that. But I think that's like a more palpable pick for people that you can let them know, all right, we can build, Ride will give us 400 seats, but we want, I think that holds 775 or something, I saw on the sign. and it gets filled out all the time, that we demand that, and then, you know, we'll pay for that extra square feet.
Thanks for the question. That's actually something we've talked of. You know, we actually saw an option that was presented of keeping the auditorium, and the debate continues about whether that's worth it or not. But we do have a concern that the auditorium space may get pulled back if we want to match the reimbursement. Now, if we have this gap and the community decides as a whole we want to put that extra money into it, then that's a value consideration. So, last thing before you go, and I was about ready to move on, but you have a lot of experience throughout the state. Both of you do. Can you give a tempo on what's going on in other communities right now? Like, are they going for bigger projects? Do you see them moving for warm, safe, and dry? Do you see a propensity to go for big?
Yes, this is the time, especially with bonuses on their way out. If you were ever thinking of doing something of size, the time is now, because it's unlikely those bonuses will be extended. There was a big push this past General Assembly session, even during an election year, to extend them for 3 years. There was no appetite. It was shot down. They said that temporary bonuses are temporary, was the message that was given. So as a result, we have communities like Warwick, who hasn't done anything in their buildings, all of a sudden approved not one but 2 high schools. Pawtucket approved a $330 million unified high school on the McCoy Field site. That was just approved by voters in November. Middletown is pursuing their regionalization vote with Newport fell short by about 200 votes, but now they're going to move on their own. They're looking to do a new high school over $100 million. North Providence is doing not 1, not 2, but 3 elementary schools, brand new, $125 million. Providence is starting a $500 million. There's a lot of, like, I can keep going. There's a bunch of your neighbors, Westerly, just got voter approval for $50 million for a new elementary school. North Kingstown is in the mix. Coventry is looking to do hopefully $95 million will get your town. But there's work happening throughout the state. And again, if you ever, there's been so much need over the last 20, 30 years that it's there. But communities are scaling up. They're not scaling down. The other thing, even with rising interest rates, keep in mind that the state covers 52.5% of it. So even if it's a 4.5 rate or whatever, 5, the state is still kicking in its half, so your true reimbursement interest rate is likely in the 2s on a school construction project.
I think the Coventry is an interesting parallel because it's similar sized community land-wise and population-wise. They have 157 million in OPEB. They've got $105 million bonding capacity, and they're looking at $95 million project, and that's because they haven't invested in their schools. So we're in a much better financial picture, but it's interesting to see other communities, how they're tackling this, and so I appreciate the perspective. All right, and anybody else before we move on? Okay, thank you very much for coming. I know it's a trek from Lincoln to, if anybody doesn't know, you're a school committee member, right, in Lincoln, and yes. Serves in many capacities, so thanks for taking the time to come down. We're always welcome. We're always happy to come down south of the tower, so you know it's a pack of lunch.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll move on to presentation by SK Athletic Director Terry Lynch, who's here to join us. I want to thank Terry. I called and asked him to put together a bit of a matrix, and this goes in line with what Dave Belzetti had requested of the committee. He was very accommodating, presented what is in front of you. Yeah, come on down. Very formal tonight. But he did provide a matrix to us. I did print hard copies that are in front of you, and I did send them out email. I'll post these on the website as well tomorrow. But essentially went over the scheduling, and I'll let Terry take the floor on this.
So thank you. For those who don't know, my name is Terry Lynch. I'm the athletic director, and I'm just proud to be in the presence of greatness to my right.
Terry, everyone knows who you are.
So I talked to Luke, and I think everybody has it in the packet. I'm not sure if the people that are here in the audience have it, but we just talked about what our facilities, where our kids practice and where our kids play. And I'll start with that. I put a matrix together of all of our fall sports, our winter sports, and our spring sports. And basically, for the most part, we've got to travel everywhere we go. except for our football team who practices, and I should preface this too, our football team and our boys lacrosse team practices at Hazard Field. Everything else, where we have to travel. And in the fall, our soccer team goes, both boys and girls go to Tuckertown. Our cross-country team goes to Curtis Corner. Our tennis team goes to Broad Rock and so on. So we have to provide a shuttle. I'll give you a little history on the shuttle. Excuse me. When I took over in 2007, we had a shuttle, and we had our own shuttle. The bus company provided us a shuttle, and I could take that shuttle and I could go anywhere we wanted to go within the town. So it was very easy to get our kids everywhere we wanted to go. I could even take that shuttle if our middle school basketball team or one of the high school teams were playing at Narragansett. That shuttle could jump over there. As budgets got squeezed and as drivers got squeezed, we lost the shuttle. And then we would get a shuttle that would come, and we'd work it out with the bus company, that would get to our place about 2:40. And then our kids would go, and they would go to different places. As we get to the winter, there's no shuttle that's coming at 2:40. So now I got to get our kids on the bus, like for gymnastics and track. They've got to jump on a regular bus and then get dropped off at different venues. So it's something that we've been doing for a long time, and it's something that we'll continue to do, and it's not a big problem. They took a little thunder away because I thought we could get money, Luke, as you and I talked about, for the reimbursement for the turf field, but that's not in the cards for them. But it would be advantageous for us to have a turf field, wherever it may be. And Chip and I have talked a little bit, and I mentioned this to Luke the other day. Give us a new facility, and we'll figure out how we're going to schedule it. Bottom line, okay? We'll take care of that part of it. I think our kids deserve new, and we've been doing all kinds of stuff. I work with Rex constantly with scheduling, so it's nothing that we haven't done before. So if we could get a new facility, that would be tremendous. It would enhance a lot of our programs. If we had a turf field, wherever it may be, you look at boys and girls soccer, football, field hockey, obviously track and field, boys and girls lacrosse. They would all benefit from being able to play on a turf facility. And you get more use out of it. We'd also, I would think we'd also have more community use with that facility because it's a turf field. We try to keep the play to a minimum on our game field just because it gets beat up. So that's how we try to move people around. So I'll open it to questions. If I know it's a little bit of a short synapse, but if you have any questions, please be happy to answer.
Yeah, so I'll kick it out to the committee for any input. I'll go to my left this time. Brian, do you have any questions?
No questions, just thank you, Terry, for the presentation, and just to tell the public, those who don't know from our discussions, the current state is our track is not usable, and the community aspect, I live right down the road from the current field, like Terry said, every single day of the week you'll find people using that. We have graduations out there. Right now, this past couple months, we've had it rented out. We've actually been profitable with the local football league, using it on weekends, using it for tournaments. So I agree with Terry that, again, if we can get something new, Terry will figure out how to schedule it, but also on the community side, I think it would be a big upgrade for the community to have a...
The only issue that you would run into there a little bit is that, depending on what you have for games there. In other words, let's say you had, and I put this example in the presentation, let's say you had a girls' soccer game on a Tuesday afternoon. Well, that facility basically will not be usable by anybody else but the soccer teams because the teams are going to get there for 3 o'clock, the JV is going to play at 4 o'clock, and then the varsity is going to play at 6 o'clock. That facility would be done and usable at 8 o'clock at night. How feasible is that? I'm sure there's some people that will use it, and you could get into a situation where you have a whole week where you could rent the field because we're away, and you could get into a situation where you can't rent the field for a week because we're there all week. So it depends on where you're at scheduling-wise. We do.
So that's the only thing that I would like you to speak a little bit of, I'm aware of it, but if you could, for the public's knowledge, so the eight-lane track would be ideal for competition, and why is that important for us?
So 8 lanes will allow you, if we ever got there, to host a state meet. If you have a 6-lane track, you could host dual meets, you could host divisional meets, but 8 lanes, they will not allow you to host, if you only have 6 lanes, the Interscholastic League will not allow you to host a state meet. Now, I don't know if we ever get there, and if it's a 6-lane track, then we'll make that work too. It's not like we have to have a state meet. Most of all the state meets are held at Brown University for the most part anyway, so.
So Terry, if you know, a lot of decisions are going to be made in the next couple of months
Sure.
about, you know, where we're going. But once again, to clarify, if a high school was built or renovated at the existing site in Columbia,
Sure.
and the fields stayed where they were at Curtis Corner, you could, and they were improved, obviously, that could work for you.
Yeah, we could make that work. Ideally, if we are staying at Columbia Street, I would be selfish to ask for Broad Rock, only because now you could have middle school use at that facility also. So that would be the only, because now those kids could walk, a phys ed class, for instance, could walk down the path and go right to the field and use the field for, not that they don't have fields out beside Broad Rock, because we'll utilize them as well, but it would be more feasible.
And just a general statement, I've lived in this town about 25 years. Our athletics, we have so much pride. The Rebels have so much pride. A lot of this is testament to you.
Well, thank you.
And so, you know, whether it's the recreation level or the high school level or any of the schools. So we'll do the best we can.
I get it.
All right?
Yeah, again, I'm fighting for our kids, right? I think our kids deserve it. And you're right, and it's, you know, I've been here for 15 plus years as the athletic director, but Bob Cavanaugh was here for 100 years before that and laid a great foundation. And, you know, our sports are good. We're as good as anybody in the state. So
that was going to be my final question for you, is if you could pick the ideal location out of what we've been talking about in the past few weeks, you already answered it, it would be the Broad Rock location.
if the high school's at,
The high school's at Columbia Street.
selfishly, just because I think we could get the middle school kids more involved
Yep.
over there. Now, I don't know how many games that they would play over there, just because of the magnitude of what we have for our sports that are going to be playing over there, but they could.
But it's a bonus.
It is a bonus.
Thank you.
That's me, that's my, you know, I'm not trying to stare anybody, you asked me, I told you.
Chip?
So my question, and it's not really for Terry to answer, but it was just something that I had heard. So I wonder if track and field over at Curtis Corner would be considered a renovation, which would then impact things, because they mentioned that a new stadium would be more eligible for money, for reimbursement. So I just wonder if that from that standpoint, the Broad Rock location does make more sense for a stadium.
And
Because
please
there
keep
would
in
be-
mind too, and I know everybody does, and Phil, I know you know this, but we got to keep areas for the discus, for the hammer, for the javelin, and for the shot put that cannot be thrown on a turf field. So there's going to be some areas that we're going to need.
Yep, I agree with that.
And,
Thank you.
you know, we have.
And the track, they did say was reimbursable, which is interesting. And I do wonder.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Since you would most likely have grass surfaces for the hammer, the disc,
You would have to,
javelin,
yep.
I wonder if that would then be considered fields that would be reimbursable as well.
I think if, sounds like what they said, because if they said if you move some trees and whatnot, yes. That's the way I took it.
Essentially, I think, and Phil can validate this, we were looking at athletic facility at CCMS, it would be a new facility, right? We were looking at a complete.
Yes.
I don't think we could work with the new existing format.
Right.
So the whole thing would be a knockdown rebuild, so.
Would that be considered, though, like if on the same site, that would be considered new still?
I did ask that question directly to Mario, and he said yes. It's a new build, because we're essentially eliminating the complex. Renovation constitutes in place.
Okay, so resurfacing of the track, no good, but moving the track to a different spot in that facility would be new. Okay, thank you.
So, and it's a good point, because if we end up, and I know we're hyper-focused on athletics right now, right? It's a small piece of the larger equation, but it's something to think about, because if we're going to, obviously we have facilities that aren't adequate now. So even if we say, well, we don't want to put a lot of money into it, we're just going to do some renovations, well, guess what? That's not going to qualify for a bonus match. So if you just put some money into the existing CCMS, you're not going to get any housing aid.
And something I would just add, this, with someone with a smidge of expertise in track, that 8 lanes, I don't believe would be a substantial difference in terms of cost between a 6 and 8 lane track, but in terms of how your meets run, it would be substantially more efficient having the option to be able to run with 8 lanes. So it's just something to think about without how the meets would run, which would then free the facility up for more use.
Good point. Kate? Good? Dave?
Thanks, Terry. I appreciate it. And I just kind of want to make the point, you know, one of the reasons we're looking at doing the improvements, and the reason this committee focused on the high school initially, was because we're seeing a large exodus of students out of the district. And, you know, academic programs are huge, CTE is huge, the arts are huge. Sports, I think, is one of the leading, if not the biggest driver of some of these students leaving the district. And I think it's critical any project we do has to include these sports facilities, because we can build the greatest high school, but if our soccer team doesn't have, our state champion soccer team doesn't have the facilities, those kids are going to end up in North Kingstown. I was at the Thanksgiving game this year against North Kingstown, and you look in the stands, and the parents aren't from North Kingstown. Their kids are playing in North Kingstown, but they're wearing jackets from Exeter, Coventry, you name it. They didn't just come to watch our game. Their kids are on the field.
I told Dave a story that last year, not this year, but last year, they beat us 15-13. They had a fumble recovery for a touchdown by a kid from Warwick. They had a touchdown pass to a kid from East Greenwich. North Kingstown didn't beat us. The surrounding towns did. So, and that's just the frustrating part that we are. And kids want to see new. Parents want to see new. They see the shiny, you know? So.
And another thing, too, that I had mentioned earlier about the drought causing us to have to use other facilities, but something that Terry is very, very aware of is, like, when we get into the playoffs, sometimes he has to make arrangements for our kids to go and practice on turf fields, because that's where all the big championships are. So that's another cost that's added in, of like renting another facility, which kids are getting to see in that case, and that's not ours. And it's another cost, and so that they can get ready for bigger games.
Mario brought up the safety factor. So Terry and I when we had the drought this year, and they could not water even the football field, Terry was very concerned about injuries, and that's why he really canceled, you know, and they had to practice somewhere else, right, Terry?
We had to play somewhere else. Yeah.
It was a safety issue. So
we moved our soccer games away, and then we had to use North Kingstown for a football game, because when soccer wasn't available.
So, I mean, we have to, as a committee, we have the meeting Monday with the town council, and they're going to give us, hopefully not a cap, we don't want a cap, but a range, so that we don't get pigeon. I think last time the 85 million was a cap that we tried to work towards. It's best if we get a range. But I think within that range, we really have to include the athletics. And for those nice to haves like the turf field and the larger auditorium, I think those are things that we can discuss maybe in stage 3 about how to fund those. But I agree, we need to have the arts are important, and we need to have a larger auditorium. We use it, and we use it for a lot of school events. And I think the sports are critical. And we gotta, you know, it's not all about sports. There's the CTE, we gotta find that space. We gotta find space for a gym that's far larger than the one we have now. So we gotta tweak those numbers, whether it's the 200 square feet, or if we squeak it down to 175. You know, the science rooms have to be bigger for that flexibility, but, you know, as we were hearing, you know, some classrooms can be a little smaller. So that's Phil's team. I have full trust that they're gonna be able to do that. But I think it's critical, as we're setting our priorities in front of the town council and the school committee, that they need to understand that, you know, it's not just about, it's the whole student. And the whole student is the arts, it's the athletics, it's the CT. So I know you get that, but I just want to make sure that everybody gets it. We got some new members of the school committee, new members of the town council, and there's still that $85 million scare. And as we know, we're going to have to go above 85 million if we're going to touch this high school. And I don't think we can do this project without doing the high school. I want to echo what Mario said. No time like the present. We have to do it now, or we're just going to live in what we got for the next 50 years. So off my soapbox on that, well, I still got Terry. Middle school, you know, we've got a middle school baseball team, middle school softball team, middle school soccer teams, and basketball is obviously inside. But are there any other fields that we're going to need at Broad Rock? If,
You know,
and whether we go to new stadium at Broad Rock or new
But
stadium
what-
at Curtis Corner, what do we?
Broad Rock's going anyway, right? That's going to be our middle school,
That's-
so that's going to be, you know, that's going to be a scheduling. We can use the baseball field over at Broad Rock. Softball, we could use, because the middle school usually get out there at 2:15. They'll do their practice till about 4 o'clock. My high school team doesn't get over there till about 4 o'clock. So that practice time is not going to be a problem. With that one field at Broad Rock, the problem that we'll get into is when we have to schedule games. And we'll just have to get creative, and if, you know, and we'll make that work. Because that'd be the only one field that we have for softball. So
So it'd be best to have another softball field added at Broad Rock.
they play right up at Curtis Corner, so they're up at, so. Yeah, again, trying to cut down it's nice for them now. They walk out of Curtis Corner, they walk up the hill and they play. Like the same thing to happen, they could walk right down to Broad Rock and play their games, so.
So we have to, just, I guess for Phil's purpose, we have to look at adding those field spaces. And as much as I agree with you, I think Broad Rock is a great location for a stadium. You know, I don't know if there's enough land with the wetlands to
Yeah,
fit in the javelin and hammer and all those events. But I guess we're doing it. We're looking.
That's for you guys to figure out, right?
Yeah, that's what the smart people get to do.
Right.
We'll, when they get back to us with those answers, we'll let you know.
Thank you.
Just want to point out that it's 7:41 and we want to allot time for the general comment.
Yeah,
Are you kicking me out?
yeah.
Thanks, Terry.
Time frame. Well, I didn't get a chance to speak, but I wanted to thank, yeah. Well, I actually do have a question for Terry, though, because Terry, would you mind coming back for a second? Yeah, come on up to the table. Because I won't belabor it, but I do have a couple of questions. We mentioned state meets, but what's your general parking like now during a game event? Because parking's a big part, whether also,
Yeah.
you know, if we look at Broad Rock, there are some restrictions there. There's restrictions also at CCMS, right? What are you
So,
sensing right now?
It can get tight, depending on what event it is. We use the little side parking lot that's next to the field, and obviously the front parking lot, and then that back field that's between the school and the tennis courts. We fill in that area too. So it can get a little hairy, but it works out.
It's just something we'll have to think about logistics-wise. And then if we did a Broad Rock scenario, we have the rec center there. Field houses are not reimbursable, but thinking fourth dimensionally here, we have a rec center. Is there any possibility you could use a portion of that? Or if we were to eventually, that was built with the anticipation we might add a bay down the road. Like, would something like that work where you could integrate into it that?
Absolutely. We've used that in the past. We've played middle school basketball games over there. We've hosted playoff games over there for middle school basketball. We've played volleyball games over there. So it's just getting into the scheduling end of it to see what's going on over there and fitting us in.
Jim, did you have something?
Just on a side note, Chief Moynihan, Superintendent, and I met at Broad Rock the other day to go over more parking there, so, which would assist athletics as well as the school. We're going to do a different route of travel coming in for the buses and the vehicles, and put a bigger parking lot behind the school, which would help in athletics and the school.
Where are you looking, do you know? Because I just talked to Rex the other day because now we're going to have to put a cross-country trail over there, and it's...
So the parking area, so we're looking for a loop the buses would come in and do the loop right in the front. Come
Okay.
in, do a loop in the front, and go out. There'd be a second exit, all right, which would go, so the vehicles would come in, go right around the school, do the drop-off in the back
Okay.
of Broad Rock, and the parking lot would be, I guess, in the northeast corner back there, like in the back.
Okay.
So the drop-offs would be towards the rear where the gymnasium is.
Because we're gonna, the cross-country trail is where that back parking lot is, right there in that back area.
What we'll do is before
Yeah.
it's conceptual right now, we'll talk to
Right.
you about what your needs are and what the
Because we have to add that cross-country trail because that's where our middle school is going to be. We had that cross-country trail in the past, Rex and I, he's gonna resurrect, that trail that we had, so.
Put that on for another conversation.
Yes.
Right? All right, that's all I had. I
right,
want to
thank
thank
you.
you, Terry, for doing this. It helps a lot. With every piece of information we get closer to refining things. Okay, without anything else on that particular topic, I think we've gone over quite a bit on the discussion of the council presentation. I'll say a couple words on this. It's really focused on creating that framework. So, we're talking tonight about athletics and we're talking about schools and all this fun stuff. Some of that stuff will go away if the budget isn't there. If we get a prescribed framework that just doesn't allow that, we're going to have to, be flexible as a building committee. We can only work within the framework that we have. Those frameworks are set up by the school committee and the town council. So we'll continue to work in the best interest of, the schools and what they need with what we have. So, Kate?
The only thing I want to add to that is, we often, and you kind of touched upon it a little bit, you hear people say, well, it's not all about athletics, or it's not all about the arts, and it's not all, because there are other kids and they do other things, but it really encompasses, those two things alone encompass all our students in one way, shape, or form. So for example, so we have athletes who participate in theater, we have band kids who participate in theater and in sports. But what we also have, which is super unique within our school, is we have our CTE programs contribute to our theater program, right? So my son is in a computer studies pathway, but he's also going to be in the theater production. Two of his best friends are in the computer studies pathway, the carpentry pathway, and they actually are building the set for the theater program, and half of those kids play for Terry Sports. So when we are talking about enhancing the athletics or the arts, we're not just talking about, 200 kids. We're talking about probably 600 of our kids are impacted in one way, shape, or form. And it is, to his point, if you have the kid who's in a computer science pathway or a carpentry pathway who is an athlete and wants the shiny object, you've lost the kid who's helping our arts program, our athletic program, and is leaving our CTE program. So when talking to the town council about the importance of the athletics and the arts and making sure we have a robust auditorium, because I can't remember the date, but I know it was last week, our Wakefield Concert Band, which is an incredible band. They practice in our high school, in the band area, and they perform their shows in our auditorium, and they sell out. In February, we have our theater production of Legally Blonde, and he is offering 4 nights because we sell out 3 nights. So the place is filled and all the time, and we rent it out a lot. So I would hate for us to shortchange not just our kids, but our entire community if we shortchange our athletics and our arts programs, because it does impact all of our students. So that's kind of my pitch to you, and I know there's a couple of them floating out here.
I 100% agree with you.
But I don't want them to be like, well, because it's not, we always hear that. It's not all about athletics. It's not all about one program, but it kind of is, because they're the most equitable programs that our schools offer.
Dave?
I just say it's not about any one program. It's about CTE. It's about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's about the arts. It's about sports. It's everything. It really needs to be a package. What I guess my point was when I was preaching before is I don't want to see us try to get up and start slicing and dicing programs off, because it's not fair, because it does impact much larger than, oh, it's just the jocks. No, it's not just the jocks. Oh, it's just those theater guys. It's not. It's a package deal that gets these people to stay in our high school, in our town, and we have to incorporate all of that into the deal. So I guess my point is I don't want to go up to the town council and give them the option of, cut the auditorium, cut the gym, just do this and move on.
Yeah, and
I don't want to get in that us versus them, because there's been enough infighting.
yeah, the presentation isn't formatted that way, right? Very
The discussion
packaged
could
option.
go that way.
Well, it could, but I also have to be clear, right? What our respective roles are. They are well defined if you actually follow the system, right? Financials are under the responsibility of the town council, but the school committee ultimately helps determine that programming, and gives us the charge to come up with a building to fit that programming. So ultimately, the town council may say, yeah, we're willing to allocate $100 million. The school committee is really going to drive and say, yeah, here's how we want to divvy that up. And can we get everything for that money? Now, that doesn't mean the town council doesn't get it to weigh in, because ultimately they can choose not to fund. Right? They can come to the end of the process and say, nope, that's not good enough for us. So there has to be some talk across that. But it will not be presented that way. The goal of this is to get some framework so we can continue to do what we do, and also talking to the school committee so they can put out some programming to us, because we need both those rails to operate in. And it won't be a slice and dice. I think we're far from figuring out the final program, but we really do need that information, because we're kind of stuck right now. We're not even sure which road to go down.
So programmatically, though, he's done a wonderful job talking with our high school educators. He's in process of talking to our Broad Rock educators, our CCMS educators, because they're going to be moving into the Broad Rock. So he's doing it. So I don't feel like we're stuck, and the school committee's certainly not going to be the ones to bring you that information. Phil's getting that from our actual educators.
Right. I don't mean stuck in the sense of like we're stuck in the process. We're stuck is without that information to be able to say, all right, are we looking at a new build? Or are we even able to look at a new build or our significant renovation? Or are we relegated to doing warm, safe, and dry and some programmatic improvements the best we can? That's kind of what we need to know from my aspect, because if we're at 65 million, I know that we're not going to do a substantial project. We're going to do the best we can, and we got some hard choices to make. If we're going ground up, we have a lot more ability to have an impactful project, and we still have a lot of decisions to make. And we may still have to, just like any new build, shave and say, you know what, that certain pieces of whatever aspect of the program may need to be shaved off to get us to where we need to go. But that's what I mean. There's work being done. I know that, and you're doing work, and on the programming schedule, all that's still spinning. But it's all got to come together at some point, is my point.
Well, and I think it will, but like I said, I don't think that's coming from school committee per se. It's coming from our educational leaders, our administrators. Because
Well, ideally,
we make the
I don't do them.
Yes, we'll give an approval, but they're going to come to us. We're not going to dictate to them.
Right.
So.
Yeah, understood. I know, I get what you're saying.
So what I'm telling you is it's not our fault.
No, we take our direction from
No, I
certain
know.
bodies, right? It's just like the town council, like we don't go to every teacher and say, hey, what do you want? We've
Well,
got a,
we are.
the school committee, that's it. And if they want to pass it off and say, hey, whatever they want is what we need, but then we got to synthesize that into a building.
Well, I think the where we're stuck is, and as we're discussing, and what will hopefully end on Monday, is the numbers, the financials, because we're going to make our programs fit whatever building we get. Ideally, the building is built to enhance, to our best program, but if we're told you're only getting 65 million, well, then we have to make our programs fit in 65 million, however that looks, right? So.
Just want to say one last thing on this topic. I want to set a reasonable expectation, and Jim has said this to the town council, right? We're not going to ask for a vote on a number, right? We're looking for that dialogue that occurs and to get a sense of where everyone's sitting at that point. It is highly likely we're going to have to come back because we're going to throwing down a lot at this meeting, and it's a lot to absorb. I come back in January and say, do you have a better sense? And get a little bit more solid feedback on where we're sitting. So I think it's an unreasonable expectation to put out the numbers that we're going to put out and the information we're going to put out and then say, tell us what you want to go. So I just want to temper, what we're trying to get out of this. It's going to be a little bit of a process. We're in the holidays. We have a little bit of time. We had it built into the schedule. The goal would be, and Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, to have that feedback in early January to then really get going. So, all right. Any questions? Comments? All right. If nobody has any objection, I'm going to skip over the public outreach section unless anybody has any burning things they want to contribute to that topic. All right.
Website's fine.
Website's good so far? Yep. It's being, usually I'm trying to make it a schedule every Friday. I'm making the updates and going through. All right, move on to public comment. Anybody who's here have any additional public comment? We're nearly into, what do we got? Once, going twice, three. Do you have a public comment, Dorald? All right. We won't melt if we go past 8. As always, we set the time frame at 3 minutes for the comments. What's that? Oh, that's right.
Was there not at one time an issue at Curtis Corner for the field, the football field and the track, there was a water issue? Okay, so why would we even consider rebuilding in that same place?
It would be moved to a different area. The presentation that he gave, it would be moved in a different space.
Okay, but the other thing in regards to Curtis Corner is if you abandon Curtis Corner entirely and South Road, then you have that entire, because South Road and Curtis Corner are on the same piece of property. Both schools are on the same piece of property and the administration building. It seems like if you're going to repurpose or you're going to sell, it would be better to have everything as an option to get rid of than just, to keep the field. I don't know. Anyway, that's it. I went to the other meeting, that's why I wasn't here for the first part, but 65 million, is that an actual number?
So I would urge you, there was a lot discussed, Dorald, so this is being recorded, as you know. I would urge you to go back to the video.
No, I will when I get...
One of the numbers, which was a program option for the high school, was a $65 million number, but that taken in isolation can get misconstrued, so I would urge you to go back.
Thank you.
Yep. Do we have any other public comment? Going once, going twice, 3 times, and it's closed. All right. So we have scheduling of next meeting, so I'll let Kate chime in because you had mentioned already. Yep.
So December 15th is our South Kingstown High School holiday concert. And it is probably the most popular concert that the next to the theater production that will happen in February. 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, not pushing it. So I'm going to the holiday concert. Mark will most likely be at the holiday concert, and I would recommend everybody go to the holiday concert because it's incredible. So I would propose that we either skip or move that meeting around, because I would hate for us to A, not have a quorum, and B, for people to miss the opportunity of going to the holiday concert.
Okay.
All proceeds go to the boosters.
I'm just looking at my calendar here. So I feel it would be nice to have a meeting before the holidays because just to follow up on the council session and before we launch into the break. So we could either do early next week or the following week. But Jim, did you have?
I mean, you can adjust the time. I mean, if you feel it's the 15th, 6 to 8, time that works, but if we can't do it, we can't do it. But the most important thing is the people around this roundtable to start making some decisions, especially after the town council meeting Monday. So what time's that thing?
6 p.m.
6 p.m., so maybe 4 to 6 or 3 to 5 or something like that?
I'm happy to do that. I just want to make sure we have have a quorum, and then B, and Chip will go to the holiday concert, I'm sure.
I mean, it might make sense, especially if we have a tight agenda, like a small agenda for that day. We could go like a 4 to 5:30
Yeah.
and then
Happy to do that.
be done.
I'm fine with that. If you want to keep the same day and we'll just back up the time, that's fine. You good?
I think that's better than
That
postponing
makes
it
sense
another
to
week.
me.
Yeah, I agree.
Works, I'm guess, and I'll,
And hopefully we get direction from the council, we can hit the ground running and really stop focusing.
So we're going to say the next meeting will be December 15th from 4 o'clock to 5:30, correct?
Makes sense.
All right.
Here?
So just so everyone
Yes.
knows.
I would say here.
It'll be, yeah, same place as always. All right, perfect. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Brian. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Have a good night, everyone.
So what do we say, 4:30 to what?